Hello everyone, so I'm back again, and in this video we're going to go over the paper The Social Impact of Natural Language Processing. This is a paper from 2016, and no, this was not a random choice. So I recently came across this GitHub repository. It has papers on social good which use natural language processing. So I'd like to read. I wanted to read them, so I decided maybe I could just read them with you guys as well. And so we're going in a orderly fashion, I guess. So this paper was one of the first in their section. So I was looking at this paper, the section on patching intrinsic problems with natural language processing research, and this was a 2016 paper. So this introduced issues like exclusion, overgeneralization, exposure-inducing bias, and so on. So we'll go over this paper in this video. And again, the authors of the paper are Doug Hovey and Shannon L. Sproit. So you can go ahead and read the original paper as well before reading this with me. Alright, so let's have a look at the abstract. Medical sciences have long since established an ethics code for experiments to minimize the risk of harms to subject. NLP used to involve mostly anonymous corpora with the goal of enriching linguistic analysis and was therefore unlikely to raise ethical concerns. As NLP becomes increasingly widespread and uses more data from social media, however, the situation has changed. The outcome of NLP experiments and applications can now have a direct effect on individual users' life. Until now, the discourse on this topic in the field has not followed the technological development, while public discourse was often focused on exaggerating dangers. This position paper tries to take back the initiative and start a discussion. We identify a number of social implications of natural language processing and discuss their ethical significance as well as ways to address them. Alright, so again, this paper was published back in 2016. So natural language processing has come a long way from then. At that point of time, there was not uh, like as the paper explains, natural language processing was mainly used for linguistic analysis, but sooner or later, but it then started penetrating the daily user life as well with the rise of assistants and other natural language processing based technologies. So now this should have now this raised the need for a unified system or some guidelines like an ethics code for experimenting, and also looking at the possible dangers which the system can have. Alright. So, an introduction. After the Nuremberg trials revealed the atrocities conducted in medical research by the Nazis, medical sciences established a set of rules to determine whether an experiment is ethical. This involved incorporating the principles of biomedical ethics as a lingua franca of medical ethics. Okay, so some background. These guidelines were designed to balance the potential value of conducting an experiment while preventing the exploitation of human subjects. Alright. Today, any responsible research institution uses these or comparable criteria to approve or reject experiments before any research can be conducted. Right. So, of course, you cannot directly experiment on humans. Right? You cannot give uh, drugs which have no scientific basis to humans, so on and so forth. So, all of these are a part of ethics. The administrative body governing these decisions is the Institutional Review Board (IRB). All right. So IRBs mostly pertain to experiments that directly involve human subjects, do and not, and so NLP and other data sciences have not employed such guidelines. Work on existing corpora is unlikely to raise any flags that would require an IRB approval. So at that point, natural language processing was not using any human subjects. Even today, I believe human subjects, like there's no direct involvement of human subjects. Of course, there are annotators and people who were interviewed and so on and so forth. So data sciences have therefore traditionally been less engaged in ethical debates of their subject, even though this seems to be shifting. So they refer to some papers. The public outcry over the emotional contagion experiment on Facebook further suggests that data sciences now affects human subjects in real time, and that we might have to reconsider the application of ethical consideration to our research. Natural language processing research not only involves similar datasets but also works with their content. So it is time to start a discussion on the ethical issue specific to our field. Alright, so what you're trying to say is now the natural language processing based models that are developed and deployed, they have some effect on the end users as well. So this paper basically wants to establish some guidelines and evaluate how or in what cases should research be approved and in what cases it shouldn't be. So the paper wants to discuss the ethical issues which are specific to this field. Much of our ethical discussion in data sciences to date, however, has centered around privacy. We do not deny the reality and importance of those concerns, but they involve aspects of digital rights, management access control, policy making, and security, which are not NLP specific but need to be addressed in the data science community as a whole. Steps towards this have been taken by Russell et al. Alright. So I guess this was quite self-explanatory. Privacy concern is a huge deal nowadays as well. For instance, recently when Apple announced that they would be screening phones for certain types of illegal material, then there was a huge privacy outcry as well. People acknowledge the need for preventing the spread of such material, but on the other hand, they also wanted to have some basic privacy rules in place as well. So instead, we want to move beyond privacy in our ethical analysis and look at the wider social impact NLP may have. In particular, we want to explore the impact of NLP on social justice. So equal opportunities for individuals and groups within society to access resources, get their voices heard, and be represented in society. All right. So the contributions of the paper, we believe ethical discussions are more constructive if led by practitioners, since the public discussion of ethical aspects of IT and data sciences is often loaded with fear of the unknown and unrealistic expectations. This is very true. So even with anti-vaxxers, this is the case. They have unnecessary fear, unrealistic theories, and so on. For example, in the public discourse about AI, people either dismiss the entire approach or exaggerate the potential dangers. Of course, we all know this. AIs will take over the world, while AIs are struggling to differentiate cats from dogs when trained from scratch in some cases. So there's like that is a huge exaggeration if you use pre-trained models. But I'm just saying that they are just predicting probabilities. They are not here to take over the world anytime soon. So this paper is an attempt to take back the initiative for NLP. At the same time, we believe the field of ethics can contribute a more general framework, and so this paper is an interdisciplinary collaboration between NLP and ethics researchers. Alright. To facilitate the discussion, we also provide some of the relevant terminology from the literatures on ethics of technology, namely the concepts of exclusion, overgeneralization, bias confirmation, topic under and overexposure, and dual use. Alright. So we'll be discussing these. So does NLP need an ethics discussion? As discussed above, the makeup of most NLP experiments so far has not obviated the need for ethical considerations, and so while we are aware of individual discussions, there is little discourse in the community yet. So a search for ethic in the ACL anthology only yields three results. Alright, so they searched the very same publisher where they publish this paper, the papers of this published journal of the paper. One of the papers turns out to be a panel discussion under is a book review, leaving only this paper from 2014 who devote most of the discussion to legal and quality issue of data sets. So we know social implications have been addressed in some NLP curricula, but until now no discipline-wide discussion seems to take place. Right. The most likely reason is that NLP research has not directly involved human subjects. So we've discussed this. So I'll just read through it. Historically, most NLP applications focused on further enriching existing text, which was not strongly linked to any particular author, was usually published publicly and often with some temporal distances. All these factors created a distance between text and author, which prevented the research from directly affecting the author's situation. So what they're essentially trying to say is, first of all, it did not involve human subjects directly, and secondly, when even they had data set, it was often distanced from the authors. So this situation has changed lately due to increased use of social media, where authors are currently individuals who can directly be affected by the results of NLP applications. So using traceability is one such thing where you can identify the individuals. So this is undesirable for experimental subjects, but might be useful in the case of annotators. So basically what they're trying to say is, suppose you have a data set of tweets and you can trace back the tweet to the original author, then it could be a privacy concern. It can be a concern for the well-being of the person as well if he starts getting bombed with messages for a particular tweet being present in a data set. So most importantly, though the subject of an NLP language is a proxy for human behavior and a strong signal of individual characteristics. People use this signal consciously to portray themselves in a certain way, but can also be identified as members of specific groups by the use of subconscious traits. Okay, so this is a heavy sentence. So basically, humans love to portray themselves as something, but some innate traits within them often reveal their true nature. Language is always situated, that is, it is uttered in a specific situation at a particular place and time, right? And by an individual. So this is why people often say context is most important. A sentence without a context can be interpreted in thousands of different ways. So all of these factors are therefore can therefore leave an imprint on the utterance. That is, the texts we use in NLP carry later information about the author and situation, albeit to varying degrees. True. So the information can be used to predict author characteristics from text. The characteristics can be detected by and influence the performance of a model. So these are all the papers. So you can see there's tons of paper which have already worked on this even in 2016. As more and more language-based technologies are becoming available, the ethical implications of NLP research become more important. What research is carried out and its quality directly affects the functionality and impact of those technologies. So a good example of this would be say hate speech detection. Suppose someone publish half a paper and some big social media platform implements it, thinking that all right, since this has been published by a big university or a big researcher, then it must have some merit to it and some metal to it. And then the perform model performs poorly, and it just sort of has some stereotype, has some innate bias. Then the model is performing badly, and also it is becoming a threat to the users. So it might just shadow ban users or block users who are not actually involved in hate speech. The following is meant to start a discussion. Alright, so one thing I've noticed is that these papers say the same thing again and again, but I guess that is because introduction is supposed to have a overview. So the social impact of NLP research. So we have outlined the relation between language and individual traits above. Language is also a political instrument, though, and an instrument of power. This influence stretches into politics and everyday competition. For example, for turn taking, all right, all of these papers are there. The mutual relations between languages, society, and individuals are also source for the societal impact factors of NLP. Failing to recognize group membership, implying wrong group membership, and overexposure. In the following, we discuss sources of this problem in the data modeling and the research design and suggest possible solutions to each of them. All right. So basically, what they're trying to say is uh, the individuals and the source of like let's just break it down sentence by sentence. The mutual relationships between languages, society, and individuals are also a source for the societal impact factors of NLP. So basically, language in isolation does not work, right? You have people give it context. You have societies have different languages, and even for the same language, you have different versions of it across different communities. So if you do not recognize this correctly, then you will have some tremendous problems. For instance, there was one paper which I covered recently, which was about bias in datasets, and they took the example of African American and Standard American English. That was a problem which I believe falls into this category. Alright. So, first of all, exclusion. As a result of the situatedness of language, any dataset carries a demographic bias. That is latent information of the demographics in it. True. So even if it is unintended, suppose you collect all the data from the state of Florida, so it will have some bias in it, right? If you compare all the data from say the state of California, then even that would have some bias in it. And even though if the data is for the similar topic, even then you'll find some differences. Overfitting to these factors can have more severe effects on the applicability of findings. So basically, what you're saying is the model learns to use these demographic biases, say the way of speaking or the way of using a word, then when applied on say an international social media platform where people are using British English, Australian English, and so on, then it will perform very poorly. Over okay, in psychology, when where most studies are based on western educated industrialized rich and democratic research participants, the tactic assumption that human nature is so universal that findings on the group would translate to other demographics has led to heavily biased corpus of psychological data. True. In NLP, overfitting to demographic bias in the training data is due to IID assumptions. That is, models implicitly assume all languages to be identical to the training sample. They therefore perform worse or even fail on data from other demographics. So I believe this is quite self-explanatory. Potential consequences of exclusion or demographic misrepresentation. This is itself this in itself already represents an ethical problem for research purposes, threatening the universality and objective of scientific knowledge. These problems exacerbate though once they are applied to products. Okay, so what they're saying is this is already uh, causing some problems of exclusion. So as I discussed, suppose the model is biased towards standard American English and it flags African American English a lot, then the model is already making a systematic bias against one community. For instance, standard language technology may be easier to use for white males from California rather than women or citizens of Latino or Arabic descent. This will reinforce already existing demographic differences and make technology less user friendly for such groups. Authors like Bordeaux and Passeron have shown how restricted languages like class, specific language, or scientific jargon can hinder the expression of outsiders' voice from certain practices. A lack of awareness or decreased attention for demographic differences in research stages can therefore lead to issues of exclusion of people along the way. So basically, what they're trying to say is, uh, first of all, they give this example that these two sections of society might have a different way of using the same word. They might have different interpretations, or some might not even know some words while the other may, and vice versa. So they show that this is being shown from even 1990s. Like, so if suppose there are five people discussing in all scientific jargon, and if I do not know what they're discussing about, even though I might be interested in the conversation, I would not be able to participate in that conversation if they do not make active steps to incorporate me. Concretely, the consequences of exclusion for NLP research have recently been pointed out to Hovey and Sogard and Jorbison et al. 2015. Current state-of-the-art NLP models score a significantly lower accuracy for young people and ethnic minorities. This is because young people and ethnic minorities might not be represented well in the dataset. So better awareness of these mechanisms in NLP research and development can help prevent problems further on. Potential countermeasures to demographic bias can be as simple as downsampling the overrepresented group in the training data to even out the distribution. So basically, if say you have five classes, one class owns 80% of the dataset, then you can reduce that one class. The work by Mohammadi and Kulwata shows another approach by using existing demographic statistics as supervision. In general, measures to address overfitting or imbalanced data can be used to correct for demographic bias in data. Then you have the problem of overgeneralization. So exclusion is a side effect of the data. Overgeneralization is a modeling side effect. So exclusion is when the data does not represent the groups, but overgeneralization is when the model itself learns more about a particular group or is trying to generalize to a particular group. So as an example, we consider automatic inference of user attributes, a common and interesting NLP task whose solutions also hold promise for many useful applications such as recommendation engines. All that. The cost of false positive seems low. We might be puzzled or amused when receiving an email addressing us with the wrong gender or congratulating us to a retirement on a 30th birthday. In practice, though, relying on models that produce false positives may lead to bias confirmation and overgeneralization. Would we accept the same error rates if the system was to predict sexual orientation or religious views rather than age or gender? Given the right training data, this is just a matter of changing the target variable. True. So what they're trying to say is this might lead to some inherent bias in the model itself. So if the model is overtrained on data which is skewed, then the model will learn more about the skewed data. So to address overgeneralization, the guiding question should be: would a false answer be worse than no answer? We can use dummy variables rather than take a tertium nodar approach to classification and employ measures such as error weighting and model regularization as well as confidence thresholds. Alright, so at some point you need to make this distinction. If my model gives a wrong answer, would that have poorer consequences, or would it be better if the model just blurts out a token which has no value? Alright, so now we discuss the problem of exposure. So topic overexposure creates biases. Both exclusion and overgeneralization can be addressed algorithmically. while topic overexposure originates from research design. Okay. So in research, we can observe this effect in waves of stream of research topics that receive increased attention. All right. So yep. So at some point, you'll see some topics are booming. So currently, you'll see a lot of work being done in this domain of hate speech, especially recently counter speech. While a couple of years ago, no one was working on it. Uh, and they often fall out of fashion or become more specialized. So ACL papers with grammars versus neutral in the title. So over the years, you'll see papers with grammar have started to fall, while papers with neural have started to rise towards the end, as you can see here. So such topic overexposure may lead to psychological effect called availability heuristic. If people can recall a certain event or have knowledge about specific things they infer, it must be important. For instance, people estimate the size of cities they recognize to be larger than that of unknown cities. Okay, got it. This seems interesting. However, the same holds for individual group characteristics we research. The heuristics become ethically charged when characteristics such as violence or negative emotions are more strongly associated with certain groups or ethnicities. If research reportedly found the language of a certain demographic group was harder to process, it could create a situation where this group was perceived to be difficult or abnormal, especially in the presence of existing biases. The confirmation of bias through the gendered use of language, for example, has been at the core of second and third wave of feminism. Okay, so essentially what they're trying to say is, suppose creating a data set for one group was very difficult, then over time people would not really try to do it. People would go for the easy way. And then over time, when everyone sees papers based on some social groups, they might think, okay, this other group is not worthwhile exploring. So if there were some biases already or stereotypes against that group, they would be further reinforced. Overexposure thus creates biases which can lead to discrimination. To some extent, the frankly public discussion of the agents of AI can be seen as a result of overexposure. Okay, that's pretty cool. There are no easy solutions to this problem, which might only become apparent in hindsight. It can help to assess whether the research direction of a project feeds into existing biases or whether it overexposes certain groups. So underexposure. Underexposure can negatively impact evaluation. Similar to the weird situation, the full form which we saw earlier in psychology, NLP tends to focus on Indo-European data and text sources rather than small language from other language groups. For example, in Asia or Africa. So I'm from India, and in India, even we have hundreds and thousands of languages, but you see only a few prominent ones are at the core of an NLP study. Rest are very poorly researched. This focus creates an imbalance in the available amount of labeled data. Most of the existing labeled data covers only a small set of languages. When analyzing a random sample of Twitter data from 2013, we found that there were no tree banks for 11 of the 31 most frequent languages and even fewer semantically annotated resources. The ACE resource corpus only covers English, Arabic, Chinese, and Spanish. Okay, so you can see there are hundreds of other languages which are equally and spoken and equally important spoken a lot, but they are not even there in the AC corpus. Even if there's a potential wealth of data available from other languages, most NLP tools are geared towards English. The prevalence of resources for English has created an underexposure to typological variety. Both morphology and syntax of English are global outliers. Would we have focused on n-gram models to the same extent if English was as morphological complex as say Finnish? Okay. So what they're trying to say is uh, this English is not as complex in some domains as other languages. So some techniques work on it which might not work on other languages. But since English is the most prominent language, you'll see every model use these techniques more often than others. While there are many approaches to develop multilingual and cross-lingual NLP tools, there simply are more commercial incentives to overexpose English rather than other languages. So industry funding could be one of them. Big tech companies are majorly oriented to an English-speaking audience or an audience which is literate in English. So they might be paying more to research in this domain. This focus on English may be self-reinforcing this existence of off-the-shelf tools for English, making it easy to try new ideas, while to start exploring other languages requires a very high cost. Next, we have the dual use problem. Even if we address all of the above concerns and do not intend any harm in our experiments, they can still have unintended effects. Advanced analysis techniques can vastly improve search and educational applications, but can reinforce prescriptive linguistic norms while degrading on non-standard language. So, stylometric analysis can shed light on the provenance of historic texts, but also endanger the anonymity of political dissenters. Okay, so let's just look at the definition of stylometric analysis first. So style a property held in common by all texts. So basically, if you can identify, you can use stylometric analysis to analyze historic texts and maybe gain insights about the authors. But if someone uses it to find out who wrote some anonymous messages, then that could lead to a huge privacy issue. Text classification approaches help decode slang and hidden messages, but have the potential to be used for censorship. At the same time, NLP can be used for uncovering such restrictions. As recently shown by Hovey 2016, NLP techniques can be used to detect fake reviews, but also to generate them in the first place. Today, we have models such as GPT which can generate text sentences which are as good as uh, like real English sentences, and all of them are just made up stories. All these, let me just show you an example of that, since we have time. Hugging Face has one of them up somewhere, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. So you just enter some text. So some, like the standard text is, my name is Clara and I am. So let me just write, I want to play cricket. So let's just see what it will produce. And I never have. Okay. Branches words have received mixed. So this created an entire story out of it. So this turned this into a quote and then said Branch's words have received mixed reviews among fans, particularly among journalists, as his high-class conduct continues to show concern. A cursory glance at the dressing room shows signs of his. Alright, so you can see that this is just a random made-up thing, but you can see that this is coherent, this is fluent, this has very minor errors if any, and like this is GPT-2. We already have GPT-3 and GPT-4 is also in the works. Also, I've heard. So you can see that our models are improving at a very fast pace now, and you can of course generate fake reviews with it. All you just need to fine tune it. All these examples indicate that there should be that we should become more aware on the way other people approach NLP technology for their own purposes. The unprecedented scale and availability can make the consequences of NLP technologies hard to gauge. The unintended consequences of research are also linked to the incentives associated with funding sources. The topic of government and military involvement in the field deserves special attention in this respect. On the other hand, Anderson et al. 2012 showed how the series of DARPA funded workshops have been formative for ACL as a field in the 1990s. On the other hand, there are scholars who refuse military related fundings for moral reasons. So who knows how the military and the government would use the technology? Would it violate some privacy concerns? So they've shown that on one hand it helps and set up ACL. ACL is this organization which hosts papers on computer linguistics and natural language processing and holds conferences as well. On the other hand, many people outright refuse. So you have this work which we might have a look at later. While this decision is up to the individual researcher, this example shows that moral considerations go beyond the immediate research projects. We may not directly be responsible for the unintended consequences of our research, but we can acknowledge the ways in which NLP can enable morally questionable or sensitive practices, raise awareness, and lead the discourse on it in an informed manner. So I'll just give a far-fetched example. Suppose you have a Twitter account and you create hundreds of bots account using NLP models. They produce text and they bombard fake reviews on a particular product. Then the overall sentiment about a product in the media and to a common person who just scrolls Twitter would be very bad, right? The person would think, okay, there are hundreds of reviews and this product must be bad when the product might be good, but a competitor might be doing that. So, in conclusion, in this position paper, we outlined the potential social impact of NLP and discussed ways for the practitioner to address this. We also informed exclusion over generalization, bias, confirmation, topic over exposure, and dual use. We had to look at all of these in different sections. Countermeasures for exclusion include bias control techniques like downsampling or priors, which we discussed, for overgeneralization, dummy variables, error rating or confidence thresholds. So, confidence thresholds is basically even though the model says class A is the best class, but then how well is the model predicting class A is the best class? Is it that class A is only predicted to be 25% but all the others are less than 25%? Then that is not really a good prediction. Exposure problems can also be addressed by careful research design, and dual use problems seem hardly addressable on the level of individual research but require the concerted effort of the community. So this was the problem of dual use. Will the research be used in some unintended ways? We hope this paper can point out ethical considerations for collecting our data, designing the experimental setup, and assessing the potential application of our system, and help start an open discussion in the field about the limitation and problems of methodology. The authors would like to thank Joel Tetrault, Rachel Tatman, Joel C. Weilenberg, the members of the posting group, and the anonymous reviewers for their detailed and invaluable feedback. The first author was funded under the ERC, alright, so this grant. The second author was funded by the other grant. Alright. And now they have the references. So overall, I'd say this was a very interesting paper. I love reading these old papers from say 2016, 2015 when NLP was starting to boom, pre-transformer time. We can see how far we've come, right? This paper is just 5 years old, but we are already producing fake text at such a high pace. And is this still okay? So this is no longer found. So probably we can have a look at this later. Also, let's try to make a fake review as well. So let's just say uh, I hate this smartphone. Let's see what GPT comes up with. A number of other players from startup companies through to the number of people who follow it in the social media pages have had to use a different name or no longer use one. I don't think this makes much sense, but you can see, uh, like, it, the problem is not about coherency, the problem is about matching the context. And I believe that was substantially addressed in further models, and even in larger GPT-2 models. Okay, let's just do something. Then if I click tab, oh, never mind. I'll just try to set it up in the future in one of the videos so that I can show you guys what I'm talking about. And again, this was a great read, and I'll link all of these things in the description. This repository is like a gem mine. It has tons of papers, and all the contributors are here. You can have a look at them as well, and you can also try to look at these papers as well. So thank you guys, and I'll catch you guys in a further video.